This week on To the Contrary.
First, will women voters cost Donald Trump the White House? Then, behind the headlines, the challenges disabled Americans face 26 years after passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act.
Welcome to the Contrary, a discussion of news and social trends from diverse perspectives. Up first, what a week in the history of women in politics.
The Trump campaign played defense against multiple women who stepped forward to tell their stories about being groped and sexually assaulted by him. Two women told the New York Times their stories, one who sat next to Trump on an airplane in the early 80s, another who worked in Trump Towers in 2005. Then a journalist for People magazine said she too was involuntarily kissed and groped while at his Mar-a-Lago estate to write a story about his first year of marriage to Melania. And there were more. But this came after a videotape was released last weekend in which Trump bragged to former Access Hollywood host Billy Bush about how easy it was to kiss women, grope them, and assault their genitals because he was a, quote, star. In last week's town hall debate, Trump called his claims in that tape words, just words, and locker room banter. Major League ball players such as LeBron James rushed forward to say his experience with locker room talk revealed nothing of the kind. Trump responded by calling all the claims lies and threatening to sue the New York Times. He tried to shift focus to a new round of Clinton staff emails released by WikiLeaks. He said they showed her staffers disrespected Catholics and evangelicals. But the effort seemed to be completely drowned out by his sexual assault scandal. Meanwhile, his support dwindled in national and battleground state polls, but his campaign denies it is pulling out of Virginia. 5 new polls showed Hillary Clinton ahead between 12 and 2 points in Pennsylvania. When a Fox News host this week told Trump he had lost women voters, Trump responded he didn't believe it.
So, Celinda Lake, thank you for joining the panel.
Thank you.
Is there any historical precedent for Trump being able to win back women voters 3 weeks out from the election?
No precedent. And frankly, we've never had a major party nominee as unpopular persistently with women as Donald Trump is.
Diana.
Quite a lot of women vote Democrat anyway, but this election is unprecedented, and many women care a lot about economic issues, and they're going to be voting for Donald Trump because they want faster economic growth.
Look, Bonnie, married white women who traditionally vote Republican have finally met their nemesis, an aggressive, serial adulterer.
Historic, unprecedented, whatever it is, we've never seen a candidate speak so openly about sexual assault, which is no longer a niche issue, and women are going to go to the ballot on Election Day remembering this.
Do more women have to admit, Celinda, that supporting Trump when the polls now are anonymous?
Oh, what's very interesting is he does do better in online polls when you don't have to say, you know, you're not talking to a real person. But that's
and actually, you could be pretending to be a white woman or a black man, whatever.
But you don't even have to pretend. The point is you don't have to admit to a fellow woman that you're supporting Donald Trump.
Right.
So it is true that he does a little bit better. But he's in so much trouble with women now, and we've never had married women and married men disagree as much as they do now, that there's no coming back.
You know, one thing, Diana, and welcome to the show, too. Good
to see you.
Thank you
so much, Bonnie.
Thank you for joining us.
Great to be on.
I've heard a lot of women who support Trump say, oh, that was just locker room talk. You hear it all the time. Let's be frank. It's a man's world. I hear it at work. That, to me, seems to be the main dividing line between women who are supporting Hillary and women who are supporting Trump, is that somehow women who are supporting Trump live in a very different world where sexual assault and talk of sexual assault is commonplace.
Women who support Trump are looking at the issues. We have a GDP growth rate of 1%. We have labor force participation rates at 1978 levels. women are hurting not because of sexual assault, but because they cannot get enough income growth to make their families comfortable. Donald Trump has put forward a whole platform with lower tax rates, less regulation, improvement in school choice, allowing states to drill in terms of energy development, and this is going to move the economy forward.
Why isn't he talking more about it, though? All he's talking about is attacking Hillary and Bill Clinton at this point in the campaign.
He talks a lot about the issues such as repealing Obamacare, such as bringing back business from abroad with his lower 15% corporate tax rate instead of the 39% corporate tax rate we have. But the media likes sex. Well, everyone likes sex. They all like to talk about sex. It's a lot more interesting than emails. So everyone is focused on that.
But would you not say this is unprecedented in a candidate for president in American history? I mean, it just, I read a lot of history. I read about Teddy Roosevelt and FDR and Abraham Lincoln and John Kennedy.
John F. Kennedy.
Even John Kennedy, who had Marilyn Monroe at the White House, who historians have said they were having an affair. He wasn't out there grabbing women by the you-know-what.
Look, Donald Trump's history has been clear from when he started running for president. Bill Clinton had numerous proofs of rape and assault. Monica Lewinsky, Jennifer Flowers. I don't have to go with the list.
But Bill Clinton isn't on the ticket this time. I have to push back on that. He's not on the ticket.
Hillary Clinton is on the ticket, and she put Betsy Wright outside the Oval Office to stop bimbo eruptions.
Why do you vilify a woman who was cheated on? Why do we do that?
Why does
it make it okay that Mr. Trump's actions, a man who's trying to be leader of the free world, leads our young people, our masses with these derogatory, vulgar comments? How can we say that's acceptable by saying she enabled him?
And speaking of Eric Trump,
and Bill Clinton's
let me finish. Eric Trump posted a map showing if the election were men only, his father would win. It started a hashtag, repeal the 19th Amendment. Is there such a major schism between men and women in this country? Celinda.
Well, there is a major gender gap, but most men would not repeal the 19th Amendment, and most men are supportive of expanding voting rights for everyone. What our democracy, and as President Obama said, our democracy is imperfect. What we are engaged in is a great experiment, which we try to improve every day. We try not to go back, and I think it's ironic that Eric Trump doesn't want to take us back to the 20th century. I think he wants to take us back to the 18th century. Well, most women and men want to move forward.
Eric Trump did not talk about taking away the right for women to vote.
No, but he sparked the movement.
He sparked other people saying that, but he did not say that. Neither did Donald Trump. Neither did anyone in the Trump family. It would be great if we could focus on the real serious issues affecting America, such as Obamacare premiums.
Please.
Going up by 27%.
When I talk, nobody talks, please. A woman on social media tweeted out, everybody who's been sexually assaulted, come forward, tell me who you are. She got more than 1 million responses. Yeah. There are people who are looking at this as a teachable moment. Yeah. It is such an aberration to have somebody like this having won a major party nomination for president, that professors at schools who teach men and masculinity classes are using this as a teachable moment, how not to be. Are we going to see a huge movement like we saw a movement against campus sexual assault because of Donald Trump and what he said?
I hope we do, because I think millennial women, given the technology that's been available to us, we are far more outspoken. But what it's done, Donald Trump's comments and the subsequent kind of backlash and the other women coming forward and saying, I was actually assaulted, it's evoked a great deal of feelings of pain and shame and sadness in many women who have been victims of sexual assault and who've been victims of groping in the workplace. So, for example, it's terrible.
And tell me about what this is doing to the women's vote.
Well, it's galvanizing the women's vote and making them turn out and making them more unified, particularly around Hillary Clinton. And the gender gap is record high right now, although, frankly, a lot of men are rejecting this as well. But what I think is really good, and I bet we can get consensus here around this table, is that post this election, there will now be a cultural consensus in our countries, much as Black Lives Matter did. This is no longer silence. This is no longer acceptable. This is no longer something that women have to put up with. And we've exposed it, we've talked about it, and now we can move forward. And I think you're going to see young girls and young boys thinking very differently. Our teachers are going to take this on. Our parents are going to take this on. This is a turning point in our culture, all for the better, that we can all be united around.
And I'm just curious, is it going to be a landslide? People are talking about that.
It's going to be an electoral vote landslide probably, but a lot depends on the turnout. And there's still states that are going to go for Donald Trump. Donald Trump will still get 38 to 40% of the vote because voters will be voting other issues besides this issue. Some of them Diane has been talking about. The point is, after this election, I would hope we have a bipartisan consensus that we're going to put in place workplace rules, et cetera. And with
we have workplace rules, by the way.
Well, we have
rules
workplace
against
rules in
sexual
part
assault
because of the leadership of Eleanor Holmes Norton decades ago, but I think we can see a change in our workplace.
But I do have to ask you, I mean, clearly Donald Trump, for all his flaws, has made the point that a large group of Americans, as you said, 38 to 40% of voters, and that's what going to be about 100 million we anticipate, that they are sick of mass immigration, that they want lower taxes, that they don't like seeing their medical bills going sky high because of Obamacare. Are Democrats going to concede anything to them when Hillary, assuming the polls don't change, when and if she wins the White House?
Would you see Democrats moving into red states like Arizona,
Utah,
and Utah? You know that they're not only conceding, they're seeing an opportunity for the first time in 30 years to really broaden their own base. But Bonnie, Donald Trump has done something very important for women. He talks about his being a movement. He has finally given us a movement.
That's right.
And this, when you saw those hashtags, not okay, and the 1 million women who indeed have responded and carried this on, the millennials above all, by the way, are where this is more rampant.
Yeah.
And it does seem to me that when all is said and done, this will be his legacy, that he sparked a real movement to finally get rid of sexual harassment.
Interesting.
Sexual
Diana,
harassment.
we are I'm sorry, out of time.
It's
I wanted
for
to
against
thank
one.
you thank you so much for joining the panel. We really appreciate it.
It's great to be with
Let
you.
us know what you think. Please follow me on Twitter at Bonnie Urbay. Behind the headlines, the Americans with Disabilities Act is 26 years old, the signature law of George H.W. Bush's presidency. It guarantees equal civil rights and access to public places to people with disabilities, and yet it can still be pretty tough to get around for a lot of people, despite the law's promise. Disability rights advocate Matt McCullough took us on a tour of entryways in a downtown area from our perspective and from his perspective to show us how getting in and out of many public accommodations, storefronts, restaurants, hotels, and office buildings can be daunting if you're on crutches or in a wheelchair, or even just carrying lots of bags or rushing in out of the rain. Matt pointed out the irony in this sign, which says anyone who needs assistance entering can ring the bell for help. The sign and the door are up 3 old stone steps.
If you're in a wheelchair, how do you contact anybody to come out and give assistance?
Even though the Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA, has been the law for more than a quarter century, and businesses open to the public are supposed to be accessible to everyone, they're not. And this doesn't just harm people with disabilities.
We have a pluralistic view of this world where people who are getting older and having difficulty walking, people that are pushing strollers with children, people who are pulling carts with their computers and all of the other things that they've got in their bags that are too heavy to carry, or they're going to develop shoulder problems. They're all using the accessible features of a pluralistic environment.
The reason so many buildings lack ramps or automatic doors or things that make them accessible is being in compliance with building codes is based on a public reporting system. It is only when someone files a complaint with the Justice Department that investigators and lawyers go into action. The Justice Department, which is charged with enforcing the ADA, sends out investigators who negotiate with business owners to install automatic doors or ramps, and in some cases pay fines up to $150,000 for repeat offenders and more in special cases. But the Justice Department's ADA Compliance Division is overwhelmed and simply cannot discover and prosecute every continuing violation. Its website lists pending claims and recently settled suits. One large settlement earlier this year was negotiated with Greyhound bus lines for failing to make buses accessible to thousands of disabled users. The Greyhound suit was typical of those against large employers who are not making their public accommodations accessible to all types of potential consumers. The federal government also runs about a half dozen centers around the country to help people with disabilities find out how to make sure public accommodations are accessible and that workplaces don't discriminate against them. Marian Vessels runs one of them. She's a friendly, persuasive, helpful ambassador for the ADA.
So now we're in Ellicott City, which is a beautiful old historic town outside of Washington, D.C., between Washington and Baltimore, and we're at the Creative Arts Studio and Gallery called the Clayground. And the Clayground offers classes and all kinds of things like learning how to fuse glass. And Marian came here several months earlier to try to take one of the classes, and she found it was inaccessible. But the owner, Charlene Randolph, was very helpful and made it accessible.
Charlene was here and I started talking with her about, what the ADA says about accessibility, and it'd be really nice to be able to come and go independently and be able to take other classes. And so she said, oh, well, let's look it up, and said that the ramps were really pretty inexpensive. And she said, yeah, I can do that.
I'm happy to do it. I mean, I know, I'm sure I'll write it off somehow, but it just made so much sense to me. You were probably talking $20,000 by the time you're done. Okay, what small business person, mom and pop store down here in Ellicott City has that kind of money? So when she told me there was a portable solution, my brain just went, really? Are you sure?
Some large permanent ramps can cost that much money, even more. But the temporary ramp Charlene uses was a fraction of that cost. Marian is also quick to point out there are tax credits for businesses that become accessible. There is also what is called the business case for making businesses accessible.
It's estimated that at least 1 in 5 people have disabilities. And we have family and friends. And so, often, I don't go by myself to do things. I'm bringing a friend. I go shopping and I eat out and, sleep in hotels and do all these things. And usually with other people. So there is a huge business opportunity that if you're not welcoming to people with disabilities, you're missing not only their buying power, but those are their family and friends as well.
Not all business owners say they can afford accessible alterations or afford to rent storefronts large enough to be accessible. And not all people filing complaints are honest. Travis Hausauer ran a small burger shop in Sacramento, California, and was almost put out of business by people who demanded money when he failed to comply.
Because of my being sued and having to move my business, I've lost $60,000 a year income because I now have to pay rent. I also sold the property at half of what I paid for it because after all this, it really didn't have the value that it had. And the $60,000 a year will continue as long as I stay in business. I can't make that up. So that's a loss that I have to endure.
Still, Marian Vessels trudges on in her pursuit to inform all disabled persons of their rights under the ADA. On this day, she addressed a small group of veterans at a conference in Washington, D.C.
I was injured in a car accident when I was in college, so I've been in a chair for 42 years. But you develop other disabilities. So for most people, it's not the exception to have more than one disability. But people kind of think, oh my gosh, well, you know, you've got one. I developed breast cancer about 20 years ago, and my doctors were all like, oh my gosh, you're in a chair, and you have breast cancer.
She coached the veterans on how to explain that small barriers to people without disabilities can be major barriers to those with them.
They may think it's only 1 or 2 steps, or it's only a 6-inch.
That's right.
And you say, well, I might as well fly.
Exactly.
They just don't comprehend that really is a barrier to your employment. Now you can't get in anymore. And I found that just working with the company I was, we were able to work things out satisfactory for 23 years.
You know, when I was injured 42 years ago, there wasn't a lot of places that were accessible. And you didn't have cell phones. You didn't have ways to let people know. And I did, you know, I would call ahead before I'd leave and say, are you, you know, I'm in a wheelchair, are you accessible? Oh, yeah. And I'd get there and there'd be this 6-inch step.
David Capozzi runs the agency in charge of making sure all federal buildings are accessible. He travels internationally to represent the U.S. at conferences on universal access design. While the U.S. still isn't 100% accessible, David says,
I think it's testament that other countries come to us to learn about our successes. Because we've started before, we have good legislation, we have good public policy, and so I think that's just testament enough that countries want to learn from our experiences.
So, Marion, welcome to the panel. David said essentially we're the best in the world, and yet we're really not that good when, in terms of, you know, from the perspective of disabled people, myself included. I broke my neck and damaged my spinal cord 5 years ago, and have trouble sometimes getting in and out of places. So is voluntary compliance the answer?
When you look at the scope of the ADA, we're looking at employment, places of business, state and local government, websites, telecommunication, transportation. That really is the only option. So we need to educate all individuals about the importance of the ADA and the importance of full inclusion for people with disabilities.
I do want to say, here come the baby boomers, and we're going to see this statute really take off like wildfire. But on voluntary compliance, that's how most of our laws. To be sure, with the employment laws, there can be commission-initiated complaints, but the way in which we have gotten at discrimination against blacks and women is they file complaints. Here we have what Marion is doing. She's filing a complaint, and the lawyers have discovered her because though she couldn't, or someone in her position couldn't get damages, the lawyers can get attorney's fees, and they are now rushing to take these suits. It's called private attorney general. That's a very important part of the anti-discrimination statutes.
Which all sounds wonderful, Eleanor, but here we are 26 years later, and there are more public accommodations out of compliance than in compliance.
And those are before 1990. And that's
buildings built before 1990.
When the statute was passed. And that's why it's of course we have some who are non-compliant even afterwards, but going after those others and finding a way for even small businesses, and we're very much complimenting you and making her understand that there were acceptable ways for small business to come into compliance.
You know, in the data, what's interesting about this is it's at the level of core value now. So yes, there's a little bit of contention with small business. I'm a small business owner. I'm sympathetic to $20,000. But actually, this has gotten beyond policy to core value. You have 88% of Americans now who want accommodation for employment. You have anywhere from 2/3 to 3/4 who want it in all kinds of purchasing. So America's actually really ready for this conversation, and it doesn't have to be contentious. I think and we can support small businesses, but we can move forward. And you're right, boy, when the baby boomers get there, everybody, it's all about them to the baby boomers, right? I say that as one.
That is fabulous data. Thank you for that. And you've had experience without disabilities. Just with helping family members who have them.
My father is a polio survivor. For as long as I've grown up, the ADA was at the centerpiece of the things we loved about America because he's from India originally, and he says what's beautiful about this country is we value each individual life. People come and rush to our aid as we as a family go out to dinner and we see that there's a step there and we've got to lift Dad's wheelchair. Just recently I ordered a ramp online to make my home accessible for my dad's wheelchair. And it's interesting to see what challenges we as family members have to face, but it's so good where we are right now. I look at other countries in the world, they don't even have what we have. We can do better though, I completely agree. And things like tax credits for small businesses, that makes it all the more sweeter.
All right, that's it for this edition. Please follow me on Twitter and visit our website, pbs.org/to the contrary. And whether you agree or think to the contrary, see you next week. Everybody was amazing. Oh, they were awesome. That was wonderful.